It's such a joy to be here, especially on this day. This is likely the peak day of holiday stress. It's the weekend before the holiday. And for those who have loved ones out of town, it's the last weekend to shop to get it in the mail so they can get it by Christmas. So this is a week I always think of as a week where we can be stressed or we can be blessed. This is your choice. And so, what I want to talk about today is turning stressing into blessing. Now, another aspect of this season, as we are an interfaith church, is that it is not only the season of Christmas, Diwali, and the winter solstice, or many other holidays. It is also the season that we come upon Hanukkah. And the Hanukkah story is an illustration of how we can turn stressings into blessings. Hanukkah is a Jewish festival commemorating the recovery of Jerusalem and the subsequent rededication of the Second Temple at the beginning of the Maccabean revolt against the Greek Empire in the second century BC. This year it's held between December 25th and January 2nd. So our beloved Reverend Bonnie Berger used to say, every Jewish holiday can be summarized in the following way. They tried to kill us. We prevailed. Let's eat. And this one is no different. Uh, the Maccabees were a sect of Judaism, and the Greeks tried to overcome them, subdue them, and they couldn't. But when they went back to the temple after they won the war, the temple had been trashed. So just imagine the stress you would be under, or your friends in Florida or North Carolina have been under when they went back to their homes and their homes were trashed by hurricanes or other things that have happened. So the Maccabees went back into their temple and it was they were absolutely devastated. But they know they needed to rededicate it before the next Sabbath. They realized that in order to dedicate the temple, they needed a lot more olive oil than they had. They seemed to only have 1 day's worth of olive oil. And it would take days and days and days to develop enough olive oil to rededicate the temple. And the reason that it would take so long is because the olives had to be picked from the trees had to be blessed. The olives had to be picked from the blessed trees. The blessed olives had to be mashed to get the oil out. All the sediments and impurities had to be blessed out of the oil. The oil had to be sifted. And they knew this would take 8 days, but they only had 1 day's worth of oil left. But somehow they experienced a miracle instead. That 1 day of oil lasted for 8 days until they could get the olives pressed, until they could get the new oil so they could dedicate the temple. Why is this so important? Because it was evidence of God's presence, evidence of God's provision, and evidence of God's love. So not only do we celebrate the victory of the Maccabees over their would-be conquistadors, we also celebrate God's provision, God's blessing, and it is also a rededication, for they rededicated themselves to the consciousness of God. Because Hanukkah actually means rededication. And just like the Maccabees rededicated their temple, despite the stress that they were under, this is a time when we can rededicate to the consciousness of heaven, the consciousness of light, the consciousness of grace, the consciousness of endless possibilities, regardless of the stresses that we may have put ourselves under. We do not have to, just like the Maccabees didn't have to live under suppression, we do not have to live in the consciousness of pain, suffering, struggle, and lack, because we too can rededicate our lives to the spiritual principles of joy and peace and oneness with God and the ease of life that that offers. So right now, it's understandable that there are stressors. We talked about some of them. We talked about holiday stressors. There are stressors in the world as our world seems to be filled with rapid change. When you look at the world situation and wars that have been going on for decades suddenly ending, regimes changing seemingly overnight. When you look at our political discourse and political change, we see stressors all around us. But there is something very important to remember in this. As Reed Brown, one of my mentors, used to say, it came to pass, it didn't come to stay. So a stressor is temporary. For what is a stressor really? A stressor is the gap between where we perceive ourselves to be and where we believe we need to be in order to be whole and at peace and in joy. So any stressor is an invitation to growth. Any stressor is an invitation to healing. Any stressor is an invitation to invite God into that place where there is stress so we can learn, see it differently, and realize that we are already loved and blessed. So a stressor is a hint from the universe that we may need to rebalance, reprioritize, and bring God to the mix. And the other important part of this is that on the other side of any stressor is a blessing. We just have to get through the stressing in order to receive the blessing. So how do we get through the stressing in order to receive the blessing? Well, there are 3 points that I want to make about that, and I'm out. Number 1, keep your eye on the prize. Number 2, spend your spiritual capital wisely. And number 3, dance in advance to welcome your blessing. So I'm going to repeat these. Number 1, keep your eyes on the prize. Number 2, spend your spiritual capital wisely. And number 3, dance in advance to welcome your blessing. So what do I mean when I say keep your eyes on the prize? Well, when the Maccabees came back to their temple that had been destroyed, they could have stopped. They could have gotten discouraged. They could have gotten angry. They could have gotten resentful. They could have held grievances against the Greeks who tried to destroy them. But they didn't. A Course in Miracles, lessons 78, 79, 88, 89 say, let miracles replace grievances today. They could have stayed in grievance, but they opened to a miracle instead. Well, guess what? When we are stressed, we can stay in anger or fear or doubt or stress, or we can open to a miracle as well. A Course in Miracles says, my mind only thinks what I think with God. And what that is we can allow our minds to hold the thoughts of grievances. We can allow our minds to hold the thoughts of resentments. We can allow our minds to hold the thoughts that keep us under stress. I am not enough. There is not enough time. There is not enough money. There is not enough support. Or we can allow God in. God, I let you into my mind. Let me see this differently. Cause me to know of my strength and my power. Cause me to know of my worthiness, regardless of how this turns out. When we say my mind thinks only what I think with God, what we're doing is we're preparing our mind for God's thoughts. For our thoughts obviously are not working, for they are putting us under stress. Any stressful situation begins with a stressful thought. But God's thoughts are of love. And God's thoughts bring us calm. God's thoughts bring us peace. God's thoughts bring us joy. So our task is to hold only God's thoughts and to release our thoughts. Now, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 said it best. When Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 said, trust the Lord God with all your heart and lean not on your own understandings. In all thy ways acknowledge God, and God will direct thy paths. In essence, that's saying the same thing. Let my mind hold only what I think with God. Let me know God's thoughts, because my thoughts are causing me stress. My thoughts of my not enoughness, my thoughts of my inadequacy, my thoughts of the universe's difficulties, my thoughts of not being able to find a parking lot outside the mall on the Sunday before Christmas. They're causing me stress because I got to get this gift and I got to get it in the mail. My thoughts of what's going to happen with a new situation, this is causing me stress. But God may have a better idea, just like Ford did back in the 60s. And A Course in Miracles echoes what Proverbs said, trust God and lean not on your own understandings. Acknowledge God and let God direct your paths. A Course in Miracles lesson 151 says, He will remove the faith you placed in pain, disaster, suffering, and loss. You know, we've placed a lot of belief and we've given a lot of power over to the possibility of pain, suffering, loss, and disaster. And that's why these things cause us stress because we give them so much power. We have so much fear in them. What is fear? False evidence appearing real because we've seen so much false evidence of these things. But God, and this is what A Course in Miracles says, God gives you vision, which can look beyond the grim appearances and can behold the gentle face of Christ within them. You will no longer doubt that only good can come to you who are beloved of God, for he will judge all happenings and teach you the simple lesson they contain. In other words, we look at disaster and we give it power to rule our emotions. But God can give us a different vision, causing us to see it differently. And we can see the lesson and we can see the blessing that the lesson offers us instead. So let us not judge what's going on and cause ourselves stress. Let's give it over to God. God, and this is what it says further. He will select the elements in them which represent the truth and disregard those aspects that reflect but our dreams. In other words, there's a truth, a healing, an opportunity for growth in anything. And when we give it over to God, God will show us and teach us what is the opportunity for truth. And all the savage fantasies that we've spun and the fear and the pain that we've got around those savage fantasies, God will lift that from us. And he will interpret all you see, all occurrences, each circumstance, and every happening that seems to touch on you in any way from his one frame of reference, from God's frame of reference. From our frame of reference, it's scary. From our frame of reference, it's maddening. But from God's frame of reference, which is wholly unified and sure, you will see the love beyond the hate, the constancy in change, the pure in sin, and only heaven's blessings on the world. In other words, God has a different vision. God has a better vision. God can see the lesson. God can see the healing. God can see the blessing beyond the stressing. We must place our minds in God's mind. We must ask God, and we must catch it early. What do I mean by catch it early? Whenever you're having a stressful thought, whenever you're having a distressed thought, that thought has probably been bubbling for a while. It's probably been giving itself time to come to a head, right? So one of the first things we can do is catch it early. The moment you find your mind wandering down a dead end. And what is the first barometer of where our minds are going? How we feel. So the moment we feel out of sorts, the moment we feel the beginnings or the hints of stress, the moment that we feel our minds wandering, we can catch it early. And we can say, God, I give this to you. Lift me from the lie and cause me to know the truth. God in lesson 151 says, give God your thoughts, and he will give them back as miracles, which joyously proclaim the wholeness and the happiness of God. And each thought is transformed. It takes on healing power from the mind which saw it in truth and failed to deceive what was falsely added. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Let me give you an example of how this works when you give your thoughts over to God. There was someone that was causing me stress. This person was asking me to do things that were part of my role, but not part of my soul. This person was asking me to continue to engage in a pattern that was disempowering to the person and also disempowering to me because it was inconsistent with my priorities for my soul's growth, and it was inconsistent with this person's soul's priorities for their growth because it was keeping us in a pattern of my enabling this person. And so I had to set a boundary. I had to say no. I had to say, not now. I had to say, I can't deal with this right now. And it was causing me stress, and it was causing the other person stress. So what did I do? I had to give it over to God. God, there's a whole lot in this. What is the truth that you would have me know? And the voice of God said, the truth is, this is a part of you that feels that you are inadequate. This is a part of you that feels that you have failed. This is a part of you that feels that you are weak and don't have the strength to do everything. This is a part of you that believes that you should be Atlas holding the world on your shoulders and you're not. This is a part of you that needs to accept that you're not. This is a part of you that believes, that needs to know that you are the holy beloved of God and you deserve to be blessed and not stressed. So I gave the thoughts over to God, and all my false thoughts were extruded, just like when the olive oil had to be purified, all of the sediment had to be extruded. We all have false thoughts. We all have thoughts about our not enoughness, and they cloud our vision and they cloud our judgment. But when we give our thoughts over to God, when we acknowledge God, when we allow God to direct our paths, when we ask God, what is the truth within this? The truth, and you notice in that story, the truth had nothing to do with the other person because the truth is only what it has to do with you. The truth was, these are errors in your thoughts that are causing you stress. And the truth is, you are beloved, so you need not be stressed. And you know what that was like? That was kind of like dialysis. Because God, I gave my thoughts over to God. God extruded out all the lies I had been telling myself about my inadequacy, all the lies I had been telling myself about how the world stands on my shoulders, and if I shrug, the world is going to fall off. All the inadequacies I had been telling myself about a certain relationship and the belief that this imbalance needed to be. The lies I had been telling myself about what my role is in this, and my role had become an enabler instead of an empowerer, and the truth that my soul needed to be in a different role and not in the role of the enabler or the empowerer. God took all those thoughts away and brought me back the truth, fed me back the truth. You're the beloved of God, and that's all there is to it. So the story is not about me. The story is about what we can do to give our thoughts over to God. And the benefit is you have a closer walk with God. You feel God's presence. You feel God's light. You feel God's embrace. You feel God as having your back. You feel God in your corner. Which brings me to the second point. Use your spiritual capital wisely. Not only do you have to rely on God, ask God, give God your thoughts, and let God give you back the truth, but you have to spend your spiritual capital wisely. So, what is spiritual capital? What is spiritual capital? First, let's understand what capital is in the first place. So, Toyota wants to build cars in America. They've got some money from the cars they already built and sold. So they invest that capital, they invest that money in building a factory in Georgia where they can build Toyotas here in the States. That is capital. That factory is the means of production, the means that produces goods. Well, they have capital. They don't waste that capital by building a sports stadium. They didn't waste that capital by building a movie theater. They knew what they needed to do. They needed to invest that capital in building a car factory. Think of it another way. You have capital. You may have a rental property you either inherited or bought 20 years ago. It's paid for now, and the rent you get from it helps fuel your retirement or your pre-retirement. You've got capital. You don't waste it. You choose your tenants wisely. You don't waste it. You spend your capital wisely, right? Well, you've got spiritual capital. And this is the most important asset that you have. The most important asset that you have is spiritual capital. What are you thinking about? Whatever it is you're thinking about, is that what you're creating? That is your spiritual capital. Whatever you're praying on, is that what you're creating? That is your spiritual capital. The most important asset that you have is the spiritual power of creation with which you have been imbued by God. The most important asset that you have is the spiritual capital that comes through your channel in the form of light and goes out from you and draws its reflection. So don't waste that spiritual capital on worry. For when you spend that spiritual capital worrying, you get a return on that capital. When you spend your capital worrying, you get worry back. You get something to worry about. When you spend your capital in regret, you get something more to regret. So spend your spiritual capital wisely. You know, the Maccabees, they knew they had 7 days to clean the temple. So they didn't waste their capital wailing and worrying, what if this doesn't happen? What if that doesn't happen? They didn't spend their capital regretting what had happened. They spent their capital doing the work. Your task, my task, our task is to spend our spiritual capital doing the work, not worrying about the future, not whining about the past, but instead being in the present. For God will meet you in the present, and God will take those thoughts from you, and God will take the pain from you, and God will take the fear from you, and God will take the doubt from you, and God will return to you the blessed assurance of its love, of its grace, of its embrace, of its wisdom, of its point of view, as you give over to God that which you no longer need and use the capital God gave you, which is the creative power and energy and light that flows through you to create your good. Your spiritual capital is your greatest resource. So do not spend it stressing over what was or what can be. Spend it creating what you desire. A Course in Miracles says the power of decision is my own. You can decide to either focus on the stressors, or you can decide to focus on the blessing on the other side. The blessing on the other side is a deeper touch of God. The blessing on the other side is reassurance of yourself as holy. The blessing on the other side is that more and more of you becomes God and less of you becomes the ego's fears and doubts. So whatever you concentrate on is what you create more of. Energy flows where attention goes. So the third and final point, and now I'm out, is dance in advance. Hold the feeling of the miracle you desire. What is the miracle you desire? You don't have enough time. You don't have enough support. You don't have enough money. The miracle is not more time, more support, more money. The miracle is that God causes you to see yourself as infinite, with infinite resources. God causes you to see yourself as wise, and God vision prioritizes your task. God causes you to see yourself as whole and holy, and so you don't have to jump through hoops and do all kinds of things holding the world on your shoulders in order to believe yourself to be holy, because you already are. So hold the feeling of the miracle you desire. Hold the feeling of your wholeness. Hold the feeling of your innocence. Hold the feeling of your deservingness. Hold the feeling that you are not alone, that God is with you. Hold the feeling that God wills for you joy. Hold the feeling of the inner peace that you have learned to cultivate despite what's going on within you. Hold the feeling of the miracle you desire, because according to Neville Goddard, form follows feelings. So when you get into the feeling of the miracle you desire, that form must show up in your life. And this is not in denial of the experiences you see around you. This disempowers the experiences that you see around you. Disempower the stress, because the stress is based on the false idea of you're not enoughness, not enough time, and somehow you're inadequate and you've got to atone for your sins by getting all these gifts in the mail by Monday. God has a miracle waiting for you, but it doesn't come until you release the stresses and the grievances and the conflict and the doubts within you. Give those over to God, and God will give you back the miracle. Give those over to God, and God will give you back peace. Give those over to God, and God will give you back joy. Give those over to God, and God will give you back truth. Give those over to God, and God will give you back direction. Give those over to God, and God will give you your miracle, just like God gave the Maccabees 7 days worth of oil out of one. God will give you love where you do not believe love to be present. God will give you peace where you do not believe peace to be possible. God will give you joy where you believe that all your paths for joy have been foreclosed upon. God will give you new vision when the old vision isn't working. God will give you hope when all things seem hopeless. God has your back. And so the point of all of this is you can either spend your time stressing or you can spend your time creating the blessing, and the blessing awaits for you. Don't let the stress consume you. Keep your eye on the blessing that God has for you instead. Give your thoughts to God. Let God give you back inspiration. Let God give you back peace. Let God give you back the joy God wills for you. And remember that God wants you to be blessed, not stressed. And this is what I want to say to you, that regardless of what we're going through, you can enjoy the holiday blessings that await you. Be blessed, not stressed. Thank you.